The medieval philosopher St. Thomas Aquinas holds that God is the creator of all things, and as the creator, he determines the purpose of all things. Because anything that is produced by the will of an agent, that thing's end is determined by the agent. If somebody makes a chair, that chair maker determines the purpose and the end for that which is made. Likewise, God is the creator of the universe. He is the creator of all things in the universe, so God determines the purpose of all those things in the universe. It follows that because God has created all things, everything in the universe has an end. Human beings have an end, but also inanimate objects. In fact, every action intends some end. Otherwise, there would be no action. For example, if somebody shoots an arrow with a bow, the arrow has an end it will reach, a destination that will be completed. If there was no end to the arrow or the destination of the arrow, then the arrow would go on to infinity. This is the same for any type of action. If I choose to scratch my head with my hand, that action has an end. The movement of my hand will reach my head, and that will be the purpose or the end of the action. If I had no end or no purpose in moving my hand, then the movement of my hand would go on to infinity. But that's impossible. Actions do not go on to infinity. This is why St. Thomas Aquinas says every agent intends an end while acting. Now there's two types of actions or movements that I just mentioned. One is that of a physical object like an arrow or even a rock falling to the ground, but another would have to be an action based on human reason. Human beings intend an end when acting, or else they would not act. Every agent intends an end beyond which the agent seeks nothing further. When I move my hand to scratch my head, that's the end of the action. And so I intended nothing further after doing that. Now, I may do another action, but one action is complete. St. Thomas Aquinas gives an example of a physician. A physician has the end or purpose of health. And once the physician brings somebody to good health, well, the action's completed. The physician seeks nothing further. The physician can have another goal and then choose to do another action, but the first action is complete. Human beings can reach a point beyond which the agent does not desire to go, or else actions would tend to infinity, and that is impossible. It is not possible to pass through an infinite number of events. Therefore, there must be an end to every action. If there is no end to a certain action someone is doing, then there would be an infinite medium through which an action must travel. There must be an endpoint to you moving your arm. When you want to go somewhere, there must be some destination. If there was no destination or no endpoint, then your travels would never end. And while that might be a potentiality, that potentially you can travel infinitely, that is not an actuality. That can never actually take place in reality. The point being here is that St. Thomas Aquinas is showing that every action has an end, and that in human action, every agent, every human intends an end while acting. This means that there is purpose in nature, because another word for an end is purpose. There is purpose everywhere. The universe is filled with purpose. So those who say there is no purpose in the universe, human beings don't act with the purpose, they are gravely mistaken, because human beings would be incapable of acting if there was no purpose to their action, if there was no end to their action. And in a similar way, there's even purpose concerning things that are not human beings. When a rock falls off a cliff, it must reach an endpoint. It must eventually hit the ground. It does not keep falling for infinity. Even if there is a rock in outer space that supposedly is just traveling and not hitting anything, it cannot go on to infinity, because it is impossible to travel through an infinite amount of steps. There must be an end for the motion to begin in the first place. Now the question is there a highest end for human beings? Do human beings have a proper end? While St. Thomas Aquinas agrees with Aristotle that human beings have a final end as their destination, he does not agree with Aristotle that it is merely happiness. According to Aristotle, the highest end for human beings is being a virtuous person, and that virtuous person is capable of contemplating ultimate truth, of discerning the first principles of nature. According to St. Thomas Aquinas, that's not good enough. That's not high enough. Why? Because the first principles of nature concern nature, and nature is limited. Discerning the principles of nature, that involves philosophy, and there are limits concerning human beings doing philosophy. For St. Thomas Aquinas, the highest good is contemplation of the divine. God made nature, so God is above nature. St. Thomas Aquinas further states that every action that a human being takes is for a good, because every action is towards something that is existing, and all being or existence is good. St. Thomas Aquinas is following the thinking of St. Augustine. According to St. Augustine, all things are good. That's according to Catholic doctrine. It says in the book of Genesis that God created all things, and those things are good. Following this idea, St. Augustine points out what evil is. He gives a definition of evil, and he says that evil is the absence of good. Evil is really nothing in itself, but it is a lack of goodness. It is a lack of existence. If God created everything in the universe and it's good, then evil must be a lack of existence, a lack of being. So according to St. Thomas Aquinas, if a human being is acting, that human being is acting towards something that is existing. And if it's existing, then it's good, since evil is non-existence. Evil is a lack of good. So all human beings act for a good. Thomas Aquinas believes that ultimate happiness is solely in the contemplation of God, something that is called beatitude. This highest good for human beings doesn't happen in this life. This highest good happens after death. This requires that the human being follows the divine plan of God, that the human being is in accord with God's providence. Now, providence in itself is just an intelligent plan by which things are ordered to an end. And there is providence in a family. Most parents set up their household with providence. They order the events, they order the schedule of their children, they order the meals, the studies, the sports, all of these things are usually in a good parent's mind so that their child can reach a proper end. What is the proper end? That their child can grow up to become a good human being, a successful human being, that they can have skills that they can take out into the world. So even in a family, there is providence, but in the universe as a whole, there is divine providence. God, like a parent in a household, made the universe. And God, because God is the ultimate reason, God made it with an end. In fact, if God made the universe with no end, that would be impossible because every action needs an end, or else there is no action. So divine providence is a divine plan by which all things are ordered to an end. Concerning now the eternal law and the natural law, God is the ultimate lawgiver, and human beings, they have the power to understand and obey the laws in the universe. You see, if God made the universe with divine providence, and there is order in the universe, and the things in the universe, if they act for an end, it follows that there are some laws that govern these actions. And human beings, having reason and having a will, they can understand these laws and they can obey these laws. According to St. Thomas Aquinas, a law is a dictate of practical reason emanating from a ruler who governs a perfect community. What is the perfect community that God governs? The universe. So the laws in the universe, the eternal law, it's nothing but a dictate of God's practical reason. Just like the head of a household governs the family and has certain goals for the family, along with those goals and that providence, there are certain laws according to the ends, according to the purpose and the providence that the head of the household has in mind. And since God's reasoning, his conception of things is not subject to time, these laws must be eternal. This is why St. Thomas Aquinas says, it is evident that all things partake in some way in the eternal law. Now, the human being is special in this respect because the human being has the capability by use of their reason to discover the eternal law. So when a human being using their reason discovers the laws that are in nature, that is the natural law. Human beings, they have the option of whether to agree and to follow the natural law. The choice is theirs. They can choose to follow what God has instituted, the divine plan, or not follow the divine plan. Thomas Aquinas further says that the precepts of the natural law are to the practical reason what the principles of demonstration are to the speculative reason, because both are self-evident principles. The speculative reason is that part of the human being's reasoning that contemplates truth. The end goal of the speculative reason is to know the truth. The practical reason concerns how to act. Now, concerning morals and concerning ethics, that concerns the practical reason. Now, the first principle of the practical reason is good is that which all things seek after. Because, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, as being is the first thing that falls under the apprehension absolutely, so good is the first thing that falls under the apprehension of the practical reason. This is how we get the first principle of practical reason, which is good is that which all things seek after. This idea was already shown. The good is that which all things seek after. All things must seek after a good, because all things that exist are good, and those things that are bad or evil, that's a lack of good. So based on that first principle of the practical reason, that good is that which all things seek after, we have the first precept of the natural law, which is good is to be done and promoted, and evil is to be avoided. Now, all other commands or precepts are based on that. Now, concerning the order of the precepts following this, they are according to our natural inclinations. The first inclination that human beings have is shared by other things in the universe, living and non-living. And it is stated by St. Thomas Aquinas as every substance seeks the preservation of its own being according to its nature. It follows that you should not violate it. Why is murder wrong? Because every substance seeks the preservation of its own being, and murder violates this. This is so fundamental that even non-living things do it. Think about a piece of wood. All the material in a piece of wood naturally clings together. You have to physically separate a piece of wood. Why? Because every substance seeks its own preservation. Just look at any substance around you. If I look at my coffee mug, it seeks its own preservation. So in order to disrupt the preservation of my coffee mug, what do I have to do? I have to slam it on the ground. I have to do some sort of violence against it. This idea is so embedded in nature. This is why murder is such a grave or serious offense against the natural law. The second natural inclination that human beings have is shared with the other animals. This inclination is which nature has taught to all animals. Some examples of this inclination would be sex or the education of offspring. Human beings share this inclination with the other animals. So if there is an offense against these inclinations, then that would be a violation of the natural law. The third inclination that human beings have is unique to human beings because it is an inclination towards the good according to the nature of reason. Now, this inclination involves knowing the truth about God, living in a society with other human beings. The natural law is based off of all of these natural inclinations. All these inclinations are put in us by God based on divine providence. We were created with these inclinations because we were created towards an end.